Hey everybody, and welcome to Cruton, SB Nation's weekly college football recruiting program. My name is Dan Rubenstein, of course. I am joined by the head of SB Nation recruiting, and of course, all things college football, Bud Elliott. Bud, how you doing this week?
Not bad. We're almost at the end of the week here, and game day coming up. It's a good time, and the temperature is finally starting to drop a little bit. We hit the 80s down here today in Florida, which is a good thing after what seems like couple hundred straight days of 90s and hundreds.
I'm going to show you. This is what it looks like in New York. I mean, you can't really see. We're in a conference room. I guess it blurred out, but it's gray and not in the 80s. That's where we are now. But the good news about the weather turning and it getting grayer is better and better college football games are on the slate, as we have this weekend with the first really real week of college football matchups, which means, of course, that there are all sorts of recruits visiting campus, coaches, programs want to put recruits in the biggest, glitziest situations to see game day, to see huge crowds and noise and atmosphere, and really put the programs on display. So is there a program this week, obviously with the huge games all across the SEC, LSU, Auburn, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Mississippi State, Texas A&M are the headliners, but of course Tennessee, who has also done very well on the recruiting trail under Butch Jones so far, is hosting Florida. But to you, is there a school that is putting together a visit list that trumps the other schools?
You know, I don't know if it necessarily trumps all the other schools in terms of total talent they're bringing in. But in terms of significance to the program, it's got to be Ole Miss this weekend. I mean, they started off 4-0. They've taken care of business in all those games. Mm-hmm. They're in the top 10 in some polls. And, hey, College Game Day coming to the state of Mississippi for the first time ever, hosting the #1 Alabama Crimson Tide. I actually wrote about this today for SBNation.com. Hugh Freeze has done a great job turning that program around, and he's increased his record each year he's been there. It looks like he'll probably do it again this year, but what's really his signature win at this point? What win can you point to and say, hey, we really can play with the big boys? I guess it's last year's win over LSU, but I think if they were to pick off Alabama here, that would be a serious thing for that program. They could really say, look, we are one of the big boys. Not that we can play with the big boys, but we belong right here. We are one of them. They're bringing a lot of talent this weekend.
I was going to say Hugh Freeze's signature win was like February 3rd, 2013.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Signing day 2013, yeah.
And that's probably why we're talking about them. He was able to so quickly up the talent level in that program, signing that 2013 class and then coming back at 2014 and signing a good class, although it wasn't up to the 2013 standards.
Right.
They're doing a really good job over there, sticking to their formula, which is work North Mississippi, work the Memphis area where Freeze grew up coaching, and then try and pick off some other guys from around the South. Especially because when you have two good Mississippi schools, because Mississippi State's not bad either.
Correct.
It's tough to support, two SEC level programs just off the state of Mississippi talent, because it's just not quite as talented as some other states. So you have to be able to go outside that state, go into some other states in the South, and you can do that if you win some big ball games and kind of increase your national exposure there.
All right, and maybe this is a misnomer. Maybe I need to be corrected, but in a case with Ole Miss, they're playing a team that I think a lot of people feel like should win this game and is the favorite to win this game. Is there any value to? I mean, does it hurt if Ole Miss loses to Alabama, or is the fact that you're trying to get a better sense of the school if you're a recruit and trying to understand that yes, if you can come to the school, not only you get this atmosphere and this experience, but also you can be the one to sort of help this program go to the next level?
No, see, I really don't think a loss hurts them at all here,
right.
Unless it's just if they get obliterated or something, at night or a 3:30 ball game there. If they just get crushed and the atmosphere is just terrible because they're getting blown out early and often in that ball game, maybe that can hurt them some.
Right.
But I think that defense is probably too good to get totally blown out, and because of that, it'll probably be a somewhat competitive game against Alabama for at least part of the ball game, and that should inspire some recruits to say, hey. They're only a player or two away from beating Alabama. Or if they win, hey, I want to join on this. Look what Hugh Freeze has done with these 2013 recruits in short order. Maybe he can do that with me. Maybe he can do that with all these other 4 and 5 stars that are considering the program.
All right, and the class of 2013 for Ole Miss featured big names, blue chippers on both sides of the ball. What direction is Hugh Freeze going, and what has he done this far with Ole Miss's class? And of course, we're going to talk about a number of other schools, but specifically with Ole Miss, what has been the direction of this class, and what are some of the names that they're hosting this weekend against the Tide?
He's done a good job getting cornerbacks. They need to continue to get offensive linemen and build up that offensive line depth there. We know they're recruiting quite a few wide receivers. This weekend, they're going to have two kids coming in, and Alex Afdal, who's an Oregon commit, from Missouri. He's checking them out. And then also DeMarcus Lodge, who we discussed last week on Cruton, the Texas A&M decommit there, who's considering Baylor and also now considering Ole Miss very strongly. So Ole Miss has done a good job getting themselves in position there. He's coming up for that big visit. And then they have Roquan Smith, a linebacker out of Georgia, who has offers from UGA and UF, and a lot of those schools. I think he really fits their defense extremely well, kind of like they used Denzel Kimdiche. He's only 205 pounds, really fits into that kind of nickel linebacker role. Plus 5-star defensive end C.C. Jefferson, who we discussed last week, most likely a UF/Alabama battle. He did mess up his shoulder, so he's out for the year, but he'll be making the visit up to Oxford as well. That's kind of the main guys this week that are going to go and visit them.
What do you expect position grouping-wise Ole Miss to be in the best position to land because of what they're doing on the field this year and what their strengths and or weaknesses are?
I would have to say offensive line is something they're going to be able to sell, if not immediate starting time, but immediate playing time to a lot of these kids because they are so inexperienced and they don't have great numbers on the offensive line.
They've struggled this year just to get push in the running game, and protecting Wallace has been an issue, especially on the inside.
There's a kid named Javon Patterson who we'll talk about a little bit when we're talking about the Auburn visits at the end of this thing. In-state offensive guard, one of the best guards in the country. Some people think he can play offensive tackle as well. That to me is kind of a must-get for them. They've already done a pretty nice job addressing the cornerback position with Ugo Amadi and then Cameron Ordway from Tennessee.
All right, and is there anything else that you are looking forward to seeing with this specific game and batch of recruits? Do you expect any commitments, or is it a case of the prospects and the blue chippers being such high-valued guys that they're probably signing day or January kids?
It'd be hard for me to see a guy like Afdal switch or C.C. Jefferson commit, 'cause I think they're both going to probably take it to the end. Roquan Smith still has visits left I know he wants to take, so probably not him. If there is a kid, DeMarcus Lodge, who just decommitted from Texas A&M, we know he now likes Ole Miss a lot. If he gets swept up in the emotion there, perhaps he pulls the trigger for Ole Miss, and then I'm sure Ole Miss will have some junior college kids there, of which I don't have the names right now. But they do such a great job recruiting the junior college circuit, which is very strong in the state of Mississippi. Who knows? One of those kids could certainly jump on the train.
All right, let's go elsewhere into the SEC. In-state, Mississippi State hosting Texas A&M. Obviously, Mississippi, not the biggest state in terms of local talent, but there certainly is a number, or there are a number of prospects within the state that are attractive to schools across the SEC. Mississippi State, how is their recruiting profile, and how does it compare to Ole Miss?
They're doing well. Over the past couple of years, they've not signed the same level of talent that Ole Miss has. It's just been kind of one step below. Ole Miss bringing in about 25% of their prospects as 4 and 5 stars. Mississippi State more in that like 17 to 18% range, which is still not terrible nationally, but it's
right.
For the SEC West, it's kind of bottom of the barrel there with Arkansas. They're doing a pretty good job this year. Obviously, Dan Mullen. This is kind of the year they all pointed to. Can they get everything together? Can their quarterback finally take that next step? He certainly has, and this weekend they're welcoming a couple different visitors. Deshaun Raymond, who's a defensive back out of Louisiana, highly recruited kid. Darren Payne out of Shades Valley in Birmingham, Alabama, big-time defensive tackle. Mississippi State has always kind of been the third wheel in this one, I felt, to Auburn and Alabama, but I think it says something that he's always kind of had a thing for Mississippi State. He's visited there before. He likes the school. If there's a shocker to come out of the state of Alabama this year, it could perhaps be Payne going to Mississippi State. Not that I think it happens, but it says something to me that this wasn't just a courtesy visit that he made previously, and that he stayed in contact and he wants to go check them out some more, especially in that great atmosphere that's going to be there in Starkville as they host Texas A&M. And then linebacker Christian Bell, who's actually an Alabama commitment right now. I wouldn't expect him to flip necessarily, but it's good that Mississippi State is able to target some of these higher profile prospects, especially the out-of-state kids, and get them to Starkville, which is a place that's not necessarily on the way to a lot of other spots that you'd be going to, and
right.
And not necessarily a destination city all the time.
Sure. And of course, because the SEC West is so incredibly stacked this year, Auburn, of course, hosting LSU. Auburn has done a consistently very good job recruiting these past couple of seasons with both Gus Malzahn and Gene Chizik. How is Auburn doing thus far? I imagine the LSU weekend has to be pretty huge in terms of showing top kids what Jordan Hare and what the Auburn campus is like on game day and game day weekends.
It is big, and Auburn already has a lot of commits in this class. They've done a really nice job. They continue to load up on the defensive line and want to. That wants to be kind of their hallmark, you know. And they want to keep impressing receivers. Obviously, last year they got Duke Williams. This year they're going to be chasing some more kids. But two guys who stood out to me who are visiting him this weekend for the LSU game. First is Javon Patterson, who we spoke about just a minute ago, the offensive lineman out of Petal, Mississippi, and then Jeff Holland, who's a linebacker out of Trinity there in Jacksonville. Jeff Holland, a guy who is, in my opinion, probably a Florida-Auburn battle. And so if you're Auburn, you're probably thinking go Vols this weekend so that something happens with Will Muschamp, if that indeed is something that could trigger that, because Holland is a really, really good talent, a hard-hitting linebacker with decent range. He's also actually a pretty good tight end. And so Auburn's consistently been in on those two guys. Those are two names to look out for.
All right. When you look across the country, of course, it seems unusual, but Oregon is hosting Arizona tonight. Nebraska traveling to Michigan State, a team that hasn't really brought in a ton of blue chippers, but obviously has developed the talent they've brought in pretty well. Maryland hosting Ohio State. TCU hosting Oklahoma. TCU hasn't always done terrifically well, but another school that's developed talent nicely. Any other schools across the country, and also in the beginning I mentioned Tennessee and Florida and how good they've done. What other schools do you believe could have very fruitful recruiting weekends?
I mean, I think you got to look at Notre Dame first.
Sure.
Equanimeous St. Brown, which is just a fantastic name in this recruiting class. Yeah. A guy, you know, considering a lot of the California schools, but also considering Notre Dame, a good receiver. Some people also like him at defensive back, possibly. Notre Dame feels strong there. They can, you know, perhaps get this kid. And then Makai Brown, who's a defensive end / linebacker out of Georgia. He's been a long-time Alabama commit.
Right.
He's keeping his options open as to visits. And although I think schools might be skeptical that some of these kids who've been committed for so long taking visits, you know, there's really no downside for them. Hey, let's roll out the red carpet. Let's give the kids a lobster and the steak and see if they might like our campus better, or our experience better, or our education better, something like that. So even that, I know it's something people wonder about sometimes. You know, why would you bring a committed kid on a visit to you if he seems rock solid to another school? But you know, every coach out there is probably more confident than they should be in landing these kids. You know what I mean? And
absolutely.
So why not show it off?
Yeah, and it's one of those things where even if a recruit is committed to, say, Alabama and goes on a visit to, say, Georgia, he has teammates and 7-on-7 teammates who he can talk to and is like, look, Bama's not going to take another receiver, but Georgia's ridiculous. Like, there are things like that where, like, these kids talk and recruit each other and fill each other in. So
they'll tell them it's fun, go. You know,
yeah, go and see it.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes sense.
A couple other schools. Florida State is actually hosting a pair of 5-star cornerbacks. Corner is a need for them in this class. First is Minkah Fitzpatrick, who's an Alabama commit out of New Jersey, and then Kevin Tolliver, who's actually an LSU commitment out of Jacksonville. Florida State's been working to get him on a visit there. Now, I happen to think both these kids are fairly solidly committed to their schools and are probably not going to flip.
Right.
Like we just said, you know, there's no real harm, and it's also good publicity for your school if you're able to host all these 4- and 5-star kids.
Makes sense. So Florida State has a need. Obviously, Alabama has a couple of big commitments. You mentioned Ole Miss with their commitments at cornerback. Who has done well in this class at corner?
Alabama, if Fitzpatrick sticks, because they also have Rico McGraw, who's out of Georgia. Some people think he's a safety. Some people think he's a corner. I think Alabama's probably going to use him at corner, at least to start off. USC already has Isaiah Langley and Treon Mason, who, if they both stick at corner, that's a nice pair, and there's some big fish coming for USC, most likely. And then LSU already has Xavier Lewis and, like I said earlier, Kevin Tolliver Jr. So those are the three schools that stick out to me as having like 2 4-star type corners already in their class.
All right, and the number one corner in the country to I guess most people is Amon Marshall from Long Beach Poly. What is his visit situation? Do you believe he's the best corner in the country? And what do you see his recruiting battle coming down to?
Yeah, I do think he's the best corner in the country. I initially thought it was Tolliver, who I've seen more in Florida, but having the chance to see Marshall a couple times this year now, I've switched my opinion. I think Marshall is better. He's bigger. I think he's more physical, and he's just as fast. So why not take the bigger guy if he's got the same amount of speed and good instincts as well? I think a lot of people think that Marshall is going to end up going to USC, and he says he's going to take all these other visits. You know, like might go visit Notre Dame, might go visit Florida State, and all that kind of stuff. But so far, not a lot of visits are happening, and as the season goes on, if those visits don't happen, I think things look better and better for USC. He's got to get out there and take those visits if those schools are going to have a chance.
So where would it come down to, in your opinion, between USC and who among his visits do you feel like has the best chance?
I think if he gets up to Notre Dame for an official, that could be one. UCLA is a quickly growing brand in that town. So of Los Angeles, obviously, so that could certainly help them there. Florida State doesn't need a corner. I know he likes FSU, but that's really far away from Los Angeles, and they typically don't pull many kids out of Cali.
This is true. Lorenzo Booker.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Chris Ricks.
Chris Ricks. A couple of other. There's a number of other top blue chip corners who are uncommitted at the moment. Kendall Sheffield, Tavares McFadden, Chris Boyd, who I believe may be the thumbnail for this very episode. Holton Hill and Frank. Is it Bunkum? Is it really that? It's that fun to say. Good. How do you evaluate? Yes.
By the way, yeah.
How do you evaluate these guys that are still uncommitted? Where do you see them possibly landing, and how do they compare to some of the other top corners in the country?
I really don't think there's anybody on Big E's level. Big E is Amon Marshall's nickname. So just for listeners out there.
Thank you.
Kendall Sheffield is a guy with really good speed. For the most part, right now, it looks like Texas A&M. Bama's trying to get him to come visit and check out the program more, and obviously Bama has a lot of cachet. So if they're able to get him on a visit, we'll see what happens there. Probably going to Texas A&M there is Kendall Sheffield, and hey, they need help on defense, so it's not a terrible option. Tavares McFadden is a guy at American Heritage High School down in South Florida. Really good length. In fact, a lot of people thought he would have to be a safety maybe at this time a year ago, but he's showed that he can flip his hips and do things that corners need to do. This is a Georgia-Florida State battle all the way. He's teammates with Sony Michel, who, if you guys have watched much Georgia this year, the superstar freshman running back they have, who's not named Nick Chubb, and also Isaiah McKenzie is another former teammate of his, and he's Georgia's punt returner now. So Georgia has immediate playing time for him, and he's buddies with two guys on the team who he's already gone up there and seen once. Florida State is going to get him on a visit, I believe, for Notre Dame if he follows through with it, and they think they have a decent shot. I know Georgia thinks they have a really good shot. That's going to be a fun battle to watch down the stretch. Who else? Chris Boyd is another kid from Texas. He's kind of non-committal in when he's going to visit places, to be honest, and it's hard to track where he's going from week to week.
Right.
Texas A&M, and FSU. He has already made a visit to FSU, so that's not just kind of a pipe dream for the Seminoles. They wanted to come on a return visit, take an official, but he's a guy. I was very impressed with him when I saw him this summer a couple times. Really physical, very scrappy. Not the tallest, but for a guy who's probably 5'11", very physical and good speed to go along with it.
And I'm trying to. We had Holton Hill and Frank Bunkum.
Holton Hill is another really good Texas battle.
Texas very deep at corner this year. Yeah.
Good year for corners in Texas this year, and they produced Tony Brown last year. Who ended up at Alabama after everybody thought he was going to go to LSU to join his sister on the track team there.
Right.
Holton Hill is another battle. Texas A&M, maybe Baylor. Schools like that. I don't think is nearly as locked in as like a Kendall Sheffield. Like I'm pretty sure Kendall Sheffield's going to go to A&M. I really don't know where Holton Hill's going to go, other than I think he'll probably stay in the state of Texas. And then Frank Bunkum, the lone Cali guy on this list, who's not named Biggie, looks like he's probably going to end up at Stanford. I know that's where pretty much everybody thinks right now. Okay. And you don't really see a whole lot of picks for a kid to go to Stanford unless there's really good vibes he's going to go there, because it's not just like you know what I mean? A lot of people like willy-nilly will pick a kid to go to an Alabama or somewhere, but you kind of have to have a reason to pick a guy to go to Stanford.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly must have his academics in order, and Stanford's in the secondary this season especially is having a fantastic season, so you can see why that would be, if you are able to meet the rigorous academic standards, that would be an attractive place to play. So there's that too. This would just be an eyeball question, obviously, because you've been at camps and you've been everywhere and you've seen these kids and you've seen them compete against each other. One of the ongoing storylines at the highest level with the NFL and especially the NFL draft is the running back position falling. Teams not valuing running backs as much, and the position that seems to be most similar on the other side of the ball would probably be cornerback. And I don't want to know, I don't believe it could have been Kadeem Carey. Somebody said if they had known that running backs weren't valued as much, they would have played corner. When you're out on the road and you're going to these camps, are you noticing more and more kids thriving and focusing on the defensive side of the ball that perhaps are also playing running back on a high level, or is that just a total anecdotal, maybe a long-term thing to pay attention to?
It's an interesting question because last year we had one of the best running back years in forever.
Right.
I mean, like this year, I'm not totally convinced that there's a true 5-star running back. Last year we had like 8 or 9. And
that just happens some years. Yeah, it doesn't work out. Yeah.
It's cyclical to a point.
Right.
Now, if we have kind of a down year for running backs again next year and then the year after, we should pull this video up and be like, Bud, you're way wrong. All these kids are now playing corner and safety. But it's a good year for corners, I think, and I think that the kids who had the foresight to think about this early on in their high school careers are probably pretty bright. You know, and they say, okay, I do want to go play corner. We've seen some guys over the years make it more popular to go play corner, you know, like a Deion Sanders or Rod Woodson, now Roger Sherman. A lot of those guys who would otherwise play receiver even are now thinking about playing corner and doing the Roger Sherman thing there. But as far as you talk to running backs about this, and for the most part, they're still the guys who are still playing running back are pretty dead set on playing running back, and they say, hey, if you're good enough, you can still make a lot of money in the league. And, that I don't think running backs are going away, but there probably is some thought from at least some of them, or the ones with the high school coaches who have the forethought to say it, to maybe at least have a backup position in mind.
To you, and this is totally on the spot, but off the top of your head, which coaches, whether it be coordinator, head coaches, position coaches, have done a particularly good job of continually recruiting and developing corners when you look at, just over the past 4 or 5 years? Which schools, which coaches would you point to as succeeding with defensive backs like that?
Sure. I think you got to look at the Stoops brothers first, in Mike Stoops, who's done a great job at Oklahoma, and then also Mark Stoops, back when he was at Arizona, when he was at Florida State, and now at Kentucky, is continually doing a really good job with that. Nick Saban has always done a pretty good job finding corners, but then again, he kind of gets his pick of the litter, if you will there. Charlie Strong has done a nice job, more so with safeties, but he also did a nice job with corners back when he was at Florida. Those are probably some of the guys I'd focus in on. And you know, with corners, you do see some guys kind of develop later because it's hard to evaluate corner film. Because for the most part, if you're a high school team and you're facing a great corner, there's not a great corner on the other side.
Away.
Just like, guess what? I'm not throwing to you because the other guy is a high schooler and you're like a pseudo high schooler, so not going to do that. But yeah, that's why
is it one of those
so important.
I was going to ask, the 7-on-7, obviously people criticize 7-on-7 because it's not fully football, but is it a good window at cornerback skill and talent, just that sort of change of direction, recovery speed, how fluid a runner you are, how sort of aware you are of routes? I don't know how great it is for receivers or quarterbacks, but it seems like reaction and instinct can be seen in corners on 7-on-7.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt. I think that's something you want to watch. I mean, it's cool to watch receivers and stuff, and they go up and make big catches, but there's no real fear of getting hit if you're a receiver in 7-on-7, so you can go over the middle kind of with impunity. For a corner, though, the skills don't change a whole lot. You know, you can still be physical up to a point. There's kind of a no-chuck zone after a couple of yards, but you can press them even in 7-on-7 ball. How well do you use your hands? How well do you transition into your breaks and stuff? It's a good tool, and it's a necessary tool for evaluating corners. It might be the most important position to evaluate in 7-on-7.
Fair enough. And just because a top team tonight, I've heard of them, the Oregon Ducks are playing a Thursday night game. We talked about neutral field games. Do you ever see, because of the interruption of the high school week, do you ever see visits happening Thursday nights, or does that put schools at a disadvantage, even though sometimes we have been seeing big Thursday night electric matchups and atmospheres? Are there ever late week visits?
Yeah, you do see them some, but for the most part, it's you might see it at a place like Louisville, or Washington, like where they're very close to a major city where there's a lot of talent, and they can get back home on that same night. Because you got to remember, A, most of these kids, or a lot of them, don't have their own car to drive up and see you.
Right.
And B, if they don't, somebody has to drive them. Their parent probably is not going to take off work the next day to do that, or they might have to leave work early on a Thursday to get there on time. And if it's the high school coach, he really can't take his time off and drive you because, well, he's got to coach his high school football team on Friday in most places, unless they have a bye week. So if you have a good scenario where, like, you have a bye week or something, or if your coach says, okay, this is the only time you had to visit, you can go, sure. But it's a limited recruiting thing. The coaches that night are going to be focused mostly on the game.
Yeah, and you see, I think Louisville has Florida State this year on a Thursday night, and you're going to want to get, even if Florida State beats Louisville, like we said and opened the show with this, they beat them by 30 or something like that, the atmosphere at, I think it's Papa John Stadium, won't be more electric than it will be right before that game, just because of the stakes and just because of the profile of the opponent. So it makes sense that in a bigger city like Louisville, you would be able to bring in some recruits to take that all in.
Absolutely. And another school like that is Miami. A school very near a metro area. Yeah. We still have Tennessee to discuss if you want.
Yes, by the way, Tennessee, Butch Jones has done a fantastic job. I think he's signed something like 70 players these past 2 seasons of 4- and 5-star status. But
not a math major.
Not a math major, but Florida, as sort of average, if not below average, as they've looked this season, it's still a rival. It's still a high-profile opponent. It's still a school that Tennessee is recruiting against for a number of kids. What does their weekend look like? What does their the recruiting profile look thus far like?
When you look at Tennessee, they've done such a good job this year and last year, and also the year before to a certain extent. Last week, they reeled in Darrell Taylor as a defensive end out of Virginia, who up until maybe a couple of days before, everybody thought was going to announce for Virginia Tech, and then the word came that he was probably going to end up at Tennessee. And then they also got Shai Tuttle, who's a 5-star defensive tackle out of North Carolina. So you get him along with Khalil McKenzie. Nobody has a better pair of defensive tackle recruits in this class, and that's something you can build your defense around, a true cornerstone for their defensive coordinator. He's going to be happy about that. And they're looking to add on, man. They got Ricky DeBerry, who's from Virginia, coming in for a visit, a linebacker / defensive end type. Johnny Frazier out of North Carolina, who's one of the fastest players in the class. He's a running back committed to Florida State, but certainly open and willing to take his visits, check out stuff. And then Mitch Abernathy, who's a cornerback out of Georgia. We know Georgia wants this kid really badly. They can, they're promising early playing time to a lot of these corners, and Tennessee is also trying to get him. And then Matthew Burrell, who's a offensive lineman out of the D.C. area, just came off his FSU visit. We know he's considering quite a few top schools: Penn State, Ohio State, Tennessee, Florida State, schools like that. He'll be taking his trip to Knoxville this weekend.
Fair enough. And the final school I want to ask you about, and this sort of seems like a weird, bizarre world, but it's the reality that we now live in. Texas, who had long recruited very well, albeit before the season started under Mack Brown, a lot of spring junior day commitments. They have a high-profile game this week, and are they bringing in recruits just for the opportunity to see what Texas and DKR looks like for Baylor, which is now the much higher-profile team in this matchup?
Yeah, they certainly are. I mean, it's not going to be a huge weekend for them.
Okay.
I think they'll save that for a little while, a little while longer, because there's the chance, of course, that they kind of get stomped.
Yeah.
But they're going to bring in kids because you do want to show off all you have as Texas, and that's kind of one of those inherent advantages of being Texas. It's like, hey, we're Texas. Look at our facilities. Look at our stadium.
Right.
Look at our locker rooms, and also look at our product on the field. We could definitely use some players, and we have lots of opportunity for early playing time.
All right, what does their recruiting profile look like thus far? Obviously, they've gotten a couple of high-profile decommitments. Texas A&M has lost a couple of guys. Where does Texas stand now? Of course, Charlie Strong, with a history of not only recruiting but developing top kids at Louisville. What do they look like?
The most important thing Texas is doing right now, and they are doing a good job of this, is offensive linemen. They need them because their offensive line right now is not that great, and they don't have a whole lot of depth. They've also seemed to have booted about 1 million guys from that offensive line, so it's going to be important to get those bodies in. And Charlie Strong has emphasized this. We saw it when he went out and he hired Joe Wickline away for a pretty high dollar amount from Oklahoma State. Mike Gundy's guy who just consistently produced good offensive lines over and over again. They have Patrick Behe, they have Toby Weathersby, they've got a couple other offensive linemen already committed, and they are committed to throwing bodies at that problem, which is the offensive line. So Texas is doing well in that. They're going to need some more impact defenders, especially in the secondary. at the corner position. You got to think Charlie Strong as a defensive coach is going to be able to land one like a Chris Boyd or a Holton Hill or maybe pull some sort of miracle on Kendall Sheffield.
Right.
At the end of the thing, I think they'll get at least one of those guys, and it'll be all right. But the other thing I like with Charlie Strong is we've seen Texas, and they have probably done one of the worst jobs of picking out guys who were rated 4 stars, but maybe shouldn't have been 4 stars close to the end of the process.
Right.
Now with Charlie Strong, because he had to do it at Louisville, I think he and his staff really do a nice job of evaluating players, and getting them into camp, seeing how they work, and picking. You don't want to have recruits that are not rated highly necessarily, right? You do want to have highly rated recruits, but you don't want to recruit just off star lists, and you don't want to have a situation where you're passing on a lower rated recruit just to get a higher one if your staff truly believes the lower rated kid is better. So I think they're doing a good job of staying true to their evaluations. And we see teams out there who compete at a very high level, who don't really sign at the 50% mark or better, like with the blue chips. They get enough, and then they also scout and fit it to their system, like in Oregon, like Oklahoma, who's right on the edge there. Just two of the best teams in the country, who are not necessarily right quite there.
Excellent. Well, Bud Elliott, thank you very much for your time. We'll, of course, be back next week to talk about all sorts of big visits and, of course, look through another position group and figure out who's doing well, what visits are indicating, and which blue chippers are still out there and looking, and where those recruiting battles are going to come down to. Bud, thank you very much for your time. See you next week.
All right, Dan. Enjoy the weekend.